Today on Locked On Canadiens, it's the second part of our two-parter with our special guest. Today, we're going to talk about Habs' defensive depth. We're going to talk about standout talents at the World Juniors, and we're going to talk about maybe later in the first round if the Canadiens are able to get some return for some of those players that they trade at the trade deadline. Who might be available? All that's coming up on today's Locked On Canadiens in just one moment.
Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 763 of Locked On Canadiens. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. My name is Laura Saab, also known as the Active Stick. I'm joined as always by my wonderful co-host Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize. I have multiple Scotts, only one of them is wonderful, of Habs Eyes on the Prize, and our special guest, Sebastian High, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects. Sebastian, how are you doing today? And thank you for joining us for a two-parter.
I'm doing great. Thanks again for having me on. These are always a lot of fun.
We really enjoy having you on, and our listeners absolutely love you. And I really enjoy the insight that you bring about Habs prospects and prospects all around, because that's something that on our show, that's not something that we're experts on. So we bring in people who do this night in and night out. And I know you do a lot of in-depth analysis. And for those of you who are on Twitter, check out Sebastian's account, _Sebastian, because he has analysis threads with like visuals and video and everything. And that's actually how I discovered Sebastian. Was somebody retweeted his Kirby doc thread into my timeline, and I was like, oh my God, our listeners need to hear from this guy. So let's start with a mailbag question that we received a few weeks ago, but we postponed until this episode because we knew at some point we were going to have you on. And I really wanted to talk about it with you because I feel like you bring in some fresh insight that, Scott and I kind of have our opinions, but I wanted your thoughts. And this was from Adam Yu on YouTube. The question is, we have a lot of young D in our system, including our current lineup. It's easy for fans of any team to overvalue their own pieces, and many of them might not even be destined for NHL careers. So this is kind of a two-part question. Could you please rank the prospect D? And then could you explain which players are overhyped, underhyped, and provide maybe a more realistic ranking for our future expectations? And please include Jack Eye. So I'm assuming that for the purposes of this question, somebody like Jordan Harris, Caden Gooley, and Arbor Jackeye, obviously those players would be part of this conversation.
Honestly, for the top spot, again, it's different between like upside versus certainty and everything, but I don't see how you give the top spot to someone other than Lane Hutson. I know a lot of people might disagree with me and go Caden Gooley there, but
I would have.
I'm all aboard the Lane Hutson hype train, and I have been for a long time. I mean, I'm pretty sure I ranked him higher than any other public scout did for the 2022 draft. I had him 11th overall. I had him one spot. I had him sandwiched between Simon Nemeth and Matthew Savoy. Like I really, really, really like Lane Hutson.
I think we talked to you about that too.
Oh yeah, we definitely did. Yeah, Lane Hutson, the pure skill and playmaking and intelligence can't be matched by any defenseman in the Habs pool. Not even close. I think if Lane Hutson turns out, you have your first pairing offensive driver, first power play quarterback. He can do it all offensively. He still needs to work on his pivots. His defensive game is honestly, it's gotten a lot better in terms of in-zone defense. His transition defense is still pretty passive and needs to work on his gap control and his engagement against the rush. But those are things that you can iron out, and defensemen always take a bit longer to develop than forwards. So I'm not overly concerned about those things. And considering the Habs spent a draft pick on a 5'8" defenseman who looks a lot closer to 5'10" now, like he looks a lot bigger than he did last season.
He has those special skates with lifts in them because we talked about it so much.
He has to be on stilts. But yeah, like Lane Hutson for me would be the top ranked defenseman. again, it kind of is a risky selection because we see Caden Gooley doing what he's doing in the NHL already. Like, okay, sure, his actual analytics aren't great, but he's been playing with Savard and Edmondson all season. Like, I'm sorry, but ending up in not like the first percentile when playing with those players as a rookie, like he's doing great. Like Caden Gooley, I still think projects as a number 3 defenseman rather than a first pairing guy. I'm seeing some people calling him a future number 1 defenseman, and I really have my doubts as to what their expectations for number 1 defenseman on a contending team are. But
What's really funny is that I thought he was honestly, I do think that he's a top pairing defenseman. I was just like, who's going to be the guy that he's second to, right? Like that's like
exactly, yeah,
that was
no,
my question.
there's definitely a conversation to be had between like its upside between number 2, number 3 defenseman. I'm a lot more comfortable with number 3 defenseman because I still have real questions about his game with the puck in transition. There's some really nice flashes of solo rushes, and the skating ability is tremendous. But his actual decision making under pressure with the puck is still a bit inconsistent. His passing game in transition still needs some work. I think one of the issues with how he's been used this season with guys like Savard and Edmondson is that he's being relied on to be the primary player on that pairing in transition. And that just isn't his game. Despite the mobility, he's a lot more effective when he's not the primary transition driver on a pairing. And I love his offensive play. He's so good against the rush. Like his transition defending is by far the best in the Habs system. I'm a very, very big fan of Caden Gooley, and I think that number 3 upside is not only likely to happen. I think he can likely reach that pretty soon. I think Jordan Harris would probably be my number 3 among defensemen. I love everything about his game. Jordan Harris can do it all. So effective. He for me, if you have Jordan Harris as your number 5 defenseman, you're set on D. If he's number 4, I think you're also pretty good. I think a second pairing of Caden Gooley and Jordan Harris, who'd be playing on the right side, that would be beautiful to watch because Jordan Harris is so good in transition as well with the puck. He's so calm under pressure, great skater, and that pairing. Not only would you have clearly defined roles for both players, but both players could interchange between left and right defense, and both players could trust each other enough to activate offensively and trust their partner to handle an odd man rush if the puck ends up going the other way. But yeah, so he'd be my number 3. Number 4, it's tough. I think I might go Jaden Struble just on pure upside. His production this season in the NCAA has been awful, but the raw tools he has and his actual transition game are so elite. The skating ability, I still believe in him as a prospect. I'm cooling a little bit on him this season just because I was hoping to see a bit more development from the last like year or two. But Jaden Struble is still a very, very good player. Probably Justin Barron would be 5th. Barron is a great skater, has some really nice offensive tools, really good physical involvement. It's just a defensive game, and his actual passing decisions in transition that really need some more refinement. I did not like that the Habs called him up. I wanted him in it for an entire season in Laval because at this point, like his confidence was just surging because he was doing so well with Laval. But now he's been healthy scratched twice, and he's going to get sent down at some point. And that it was not a worthwhile risk to his confidence to do so. I would have loved to see them recall any other player, basically. Like I know Nick Baudin was over playing the Spangler Cup, but he'd be a player I'd be calling up over Barron right now. I think he's been better this season in the AHL, and I think there's a lot less risk with calling him up than with a guy like Barron. But yeah, so that'd be my top 5. And then after that, it kind of gets messy because then you get players that are kind of in the same tier. So like guys like Arbor Jackeye, you could throw in Logan Mailloux there. Adam Engstrom, that would be kind of the next tier of defensemen. Where Arbor Jackeye is going to be a 3rd pairing guy. He doesn't really have top 4 upside for me, but I like his game. I do appreciate Arbor Jackeye. I think a lot of people are overvaluing him. I don't think he's going to be a top 4 guy at all. But he's a fun, mobile number 6 defenseman, good skater, great shot, and just so entertaining, right? An absolute fan favorite. Like I love Jack Eye. Adam Engstrom's an amazing skater, great in transition. I have some question marks of his game apart from that. He really worked on his gap control this season, which has been nice to see. And yeah, and then Logan Mailloux. Look, I know we've all gotten sick and tired of talking about him. I don't see any real. I see no top pairing upside. I'm doubtful of second pairing upside just because in order to really like stay afloat playing top 4 minutes in the NHL, you need to process the game at least a league average level. And Mayu is not anywhere close to that at this point. I know that there are some defensive analytics for the OHL that show that Mayu's been very good, but I think that's really swayed by playing on a very good team in London, and it's just a lot of his defensive issues aren't fully exploited in the OHL, but are just they lack so many translatable elements. Where I really have my doubts with how he processes the game, his decision making. Yeah, he's a great shot. He's a good skater. He has a lot of good tools, but in order to apply your tools effectively, you need to be able to think the game at a certain level. And look, maybe he can be a number 5 or 6 defenseman in the NHL, second power play guy who's just a trigger man from the Ovechkin spot. Like, sure, if that's what he is, I think that's kind of plausible. But I really do have my doubts for top 4. But I don't want to talk about him for too long, just because we've all talked about Logan Mailloux way too much. And then you have names like Nick Baudin and William Trudeau that kind of fill out the rest, and Miguel Tourigny, who's fun. But yeah, I think that would be kind of my ranking of the Habs defensive prospects.
Scott, anything to add?
No, not on that. Not right now, anyways.
I'm excited to have this conversation this time next year and see like how these players have evolved, particularly about Lane Hudson and Caden Gooley, because I mean, I'm way higher on Caden Gooley than I used to be, and I feel like I'm way higher on Caden Gooley than you are, which is like I think, and that was sort of the point of the question, right? It's like, who are we overvaluing in this system, and who are we, whose hype is deserved and whose isn't. And so I'm very, very excited to see what happens with Lane Hudson, because as everybody on this show knows, I am 100% short king all the way. And I have a lot of faith in the short people. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some standouts from the World Juniors. We wanted to, there's some exciting players, including defensive prospects that the Canadiens might want to look at, some people who kind of distinguish themselves over the course of the tournament. And then later on in this episode, we are going to talk about later first round, if the Canadiens are able to get some prospects for some of the players that they trade away. And that's all coming up in just one moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl to basketball to anything really. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, which I know you do because you're listening to this one, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, so lots of games in the World Juniors. There were a bunch of surprises. There were some teams that played really well. What we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about some of the players that kind of made names for themselves at this tournament. There was a player that we were excited to talk about on the last episode that we had to move to this one, Axel Sandin Pellikka, which really, really cool name. Some really great names there as well. So, Scott, you had some questions. Take it away.
I do, because the biggest thing is this is a name that I saw popping around draft and prospect Twitter a lot. And admittedly, I didn't watch as much of the World Juniors as I wanted to, given the whole snowstorm situation that happened in Buffalo. I wasn't exactly at home set up to watch the games here. And well, obviously focusing on a little bit like, Leo Carlsson on there, and as from a Habs side, looking at Adam Engstrom playing for Sweden. What makes Axel Sandin Pellikka stand out so much? Because I feel like this is the kind of name that, the Canadiens, with their new drafting philosophy, they went for Lane Hudson. Pelika seems like he might fall into that same, they're going to take their risk there for that because he's a unique talent. I just don't know as much about his game, I think, as I would like to for someone whose name I've seen mentioned so much so far.
I believe that if Axel Sandin-Pellikka were drafted by the Habs, that he would be the top defensive prospect in the Habs pool. And I'm saying that as like Lane Hudson's biggest fan. Sandin-Pellikka is one of the most mobile defensemen in the entire draft. His forward mobility is elite. He is so smart in how he plays. He's constantly making himself open as like a play diffuser in transition. So if teammates are being pressured, he's constantly making himself open to be passed to as an outlet. He anticipates play extremely well. Overall in transition, because he's a great skater. He's an excellent passer. He's very smart. He understands pressure and timing and spacing. He's elite in transition. He's really exceptional. And offensively, he has a great slap shot. He's a great distributor, and that mobility really allows him to change angles in the offensive zone, which allows him to open up lanes, and he knows how to exploit the lanes that he opens up, which is awesome. Defensively, this is a bit more contentious. This is where more people disagree with, like in terms of like within like the scouting sphere of how good he is defensively. I quite like him defensively. I mean, I have him ranked, I believe, 9th overall right now, and he's very good at protecting the slot specifically. He's not going to be the guy that continually chases the puck behind the net and applies that physical pressure, because he is undersized. But he uses his mobility, and he has great scanning habits to block off passing lanes in the slot. He does well to force play to the outside when defending the rush. He keeps his stick in lanes. He closes his gaps super quickly. And his explosive skating also allows him to kind of patrol a bigger area and also react very quickly when he misses a threat. So if a pass is made to a guy that he should have had and didn't see, he has the explosive skating to make up that gap really quickly and I guess like save plays that could have become high danger scoring chances. His skating as a whole is elite. Like his knee bend and stride depth and ankle flexion and all the complex terms for skating and stuff, he's great at. Like he's one of the best skaters in the entire draft, which is what you want to see from a 5'10" defenseman. I believe he's 5'10". He is indeed 5'11". Oh, nice. But that's great. But also like he drives the middle lane consistently, and he can jump in on the rush as well. When like his team's attacking, and he plays an exceptionally modern game. He has all the tools to succeed, from the passing to the skating to the brain and the shot. He has it all basically, and he's my top defensive prospect in the draft, and he's also a tier above the next best one for me. So I'm a very, very, very big fan of Sandin-Pellikka. So if the Habs could add him, and like for me, I just have no idea where he's actually going to go in the draft, because on the one hand, he is a Swedish defenseman, great skater, played second pairing in the World Juniors for Sweden, playing pro hockey in the SHL. Like he has all these things that NHL teams love. On the other hand, he's kind of undersized, kind of offensive leaning, contentious defensively, which is more indicative of a defenseman who falls in the draft. So I'm curious to see if a team actually goes out and takes him like in that like 8 to 15 range, or if he falls into like that late first round range where he'd be an absolute steal. So I'm curious to kind of like also see like the next ranking for Bob McKenzie to kind of like get a better sense of what NHL teams are thinking of him. But honestly, if a team can add him anywhere between 10 and 30, they're doing very, very well for themselves.
That's one thing that I noticed about this year's draft or the upcoming draft, and it's not just reflected in your rankings, but it's been a few people that I've spoken to, is that there's not whole lot of defensemen in that top 35, 40 kind of
No.
range. And as the Habs kind of needing defensemen, and they're not the only team in that boat, right? Like it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be interesting to see what way they go. So what other players in your mind kind of really distinguished themselves this year in the tournament, not the upcoming, the past tournament, It is Sunday morning, everybody.
It is indeed. One guy I loved every time I saw him play the World Juniors was Gavin Brindley, who's a guy that was already in my top 10 going into the World Juniors, which is not a unanimous ranking at all. Gavin Brindley is being ranked anywhere between, well, where I have him at 8. I mean, I haven't seen anyone have him. I think Smart Scouting has him at like 10 or something. But anywhere between 10 and 30 is kind of where he's being ranked, which is a pretty wide range. And he's undersized, like he's 5'9", 170, a bit older for the draft class too. But he's playing for Michigan, and he's been playing top 6 center minutes for Michigan and just doing great at it. He hasn't been putting up the points that Fantilli has. I believe he's at kind of like half a point a game pace. But the thing with Brindley is that his motor is by far the best in the entire draft class. He's constantly just driving the pace, constantly going 100%. He's really quick. He needs to learn to kind of not go 100% all the time, just in terms of adding a bigger element of dynamism and deception to his game, because right now it's almost predictable that he's always going 100%. But he's so inside driven. He plays a really refined physical game. He knows how to apply his physicality despite being a bit undersized, which is what you want to see from smaller players. Really smart, great playmaker, good shot. Like he's easily a top 6 center in terms of his projection. And every single time I watched the U.S. play, I wasn't even watching to scout Gavin Brindley, but every single time I watched them, my eyes were glued to Brindley. Whenever he was on the ice, he assisted one goal in the Canada game. It was the goal scored by Kenny Connors, which I believe was the U.S.'s second goal. And Brindley got the primary assist on it, and he got it by it was like in transition. He was going down the wing, and then he cuts to the middle for the zone entry. Basically, like gravitated the defenseman towards him, and then dropped the puck back to Connors, who had then the open shooting lane. It's just like a beautiful zone entry. It's exactly what you want to see from players like Brindley. And I know there's a few people that just absolutely adore Brindley. Other people that are a bit cooler on him. I think Elite Prospects had him at like 23 or 25 overall. But I know that they're going to bump him up in their next rankings because they liked his tournament a lot. Gavin Brindley is just a lot of fun, and I currently have him one spot ahead of Sending Pelika, but those two guys have been I've been swapping them back and forth so many times. But yeah, he's a lot of fun.
So I was looking at some of these other players, and you don't have them rank them too late in the first round, but we're going to talk about some other projected first rounders, as well as like maybe look at a couple of names a little bit later in the first, just in case. That's all coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is also brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. If you listen to this show for any length of time, you will know Built Bar is one of our favorite products because they're so delicious. They're very, very high in protein, very, very low in sugar. And like I said, they are so good. They're all made with real chocolate. They have so many delicious flavors. And now you can get them at Walmart or Sam's Club. You don't have to order them online. If you do order them online, though, we have a promo code for you for 15% off. And that is Locked On 15. And if you want to go to Walmart, you'll find, your standard, your cookies and cream, the double chocolate, like their popular flavors are available. But as I said, you can go to built.com and use Locked On 15 to get 15% off your order, or try them at Walmart. Built Bar is so delicious. We highly recommend that. You know what else I recommend, though, is getting lots of picks in the first round. The Canadiens have already done that with their own and with the Florida pick, the unprotected Florida first round pick. But as you know, Kent Hughes likes to try and get first rounders for everything. There's a lot of players that are going to be traded at this trade deadline. The Canadiens are going to be sellers. And you know what? Depending on how close to the deadline we get and how much FOMO the other GMs are worried about, they could get a couple more first round picks in the upcoming draft, maybe a little bit later. So, Scott, there were a couple of names you wanted to bring up that we still haven't talked about, like Will Smith, not the actor, the hockey player. There was Edward Shala, and then there were a couple people that you wanted to ask Sebastian his thoughts on. So, in case the Canadiens could draft literally anywhere in that first round, multiple times. So, let's talk about some of these other names that we haven't touched on so far.
Yeah, because I was looking at Sebastian's ranking that he sent to us, and two names stood out to me. One, because I heard it mentioned a lot in regards to the World Juniors, and one, just because checking in on NCAA hockey scores, I see it on the score, or not on the score sheet, but see it a lot. The two names that I was looking at were Reinbacher and Charlie Stramel, because I assume when the Canadiens trade someone like a Sean Monahan, a maybe Evgeny Dodonov, a Mike Hoffman, or whatever, if they get a first for anything, it's going to be a late first round pick because it's going to a contender team. And that's right about where they fall in line in terms of your rankings and what I've seen around there. What can we, kind of learn about that? Or is there someone else in that, let's say, 20 to 28 range, give or take, that the Canadiens might find their luck in there, fall down there, kind of like Owen Beck fell into the second round last year at the draft?
I mean, to be honest, I think guys that I have ranked in the top 10 could be available there. Like Gavin Brindley, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he were available at like 22, 24. But for those names, David Reinbacher is really funny to me. He is extremely contentious in the scouting community, and I've had many long conversations with other scouts about him, which has always been very fun. He was kind of like unknown to most scouts until like late November, which is really funny because he plays in the Swiss League, which is not at all a development league. You rarely see players from the NL get drafted, but he's playing like top 4 minutes for them as an 18-year-old, and he's putting up half a point a game in a pro league, and he had a very, very good tournament for Austria. The really funny thing with him is people seem to either think he's a top 15 pick or that he's like a third round pick. And very few people are kind of falling where I'm falling, which is like kind of in the middle. I don't see first pairing upside with David Reinbacher. I see him as a very reliable two-way second pairing guy who's just very solid. My hot take is that Reinbacher is going to be the first defenseman picked in the 2023 NHL draft. And I'm feeling pretty good about that prediction right now. He has everything that NHL teams look for in defensemen. He is a great skater. He plays physically. He's playing in a pro league. He's putting up good points in a pro league. He flashes really good passing skill in transition, though he can kind of panic under pressure when it's coming from like right in front of him when he has the puck behind the net. But he has all these elements that I just think NHL teams are going to absolutely love, especially in a draft that kind of lacks players like that. There is one other guy, a defenseman who plays like Reinbacher, but I think is better than Reinbacher, who's a guy called Dmitry Simashev, who I know your friend David St. Louis is a very big fan of. But I think Reinbacher is going to be the first guy picked just because he has that combination of size and skill. Well, size and physicality and good decision making. He's very safe as a player to pick. But for the Habs, I don't think he's not going to be available by the time that I would feel comfortable picking him personally. That I'm pretty certain of that. But he had a great tournament. Like he was like him and Vincent Rohr were really Austria's only two great players in that tournament. And yeah, like he Reinbacher is very good. I've watched now I fully scouted 3 games of his in depth, and I'm pretty comfortable with my assessment of him now, which is late first round guy for me personally, but is probably going to go a lot higher. And the other guy, Charlie Stramel. I was not expecting to be a big Stramel fan. He's a prototypical like NHL GM type of pick where he's super physical, good skater, playing in the NCAA as a draft eligible, and yeah, kind of just brings that physical game where I was going into to watching him for the first time like a few months ago, not really expecting to be super high on him. what I saw was actually really enticing to me, and I have him ranked at 22nd overall right now, ahead of some names that I really like a lot, and ahead of Reinbacher. Charlie Stramel is an exceptional playmaker, and that's one thing I wasn't really expecting to see going into to watching him for the first time. And he does so many things so well. He's a really safe bet to become a third line center. I'm very comfortable making that prediction, and I think there is second line center upside there as well. He's a great skater. Has a decent shot. He's not going to be a goal scorer, but his playmaking really is a standout skill. He's constantly feeding pucks in the slot. He knows how to open up lanes to feed teammates. It really is quite impressive. His defensive game, the activity rate is there defensively. The actual reads are a bit inconsistent, but he is a draft eligible in the NCAA. It's going to happen. It's fine. He's also one of the most physically engaged players in the entire draft class, and he uses it effectively. He's not a guy to chase hits. He really does leverage his physicality to create advantages, and he knows how to exploit those. So yeah, I quite like Charlie Stramel. I thought he had also a very solid tournament for the U.S. at the World Juniors. I like him quite a bit. But yeah, and then Will Smith, one of the premier playmakers in the entire draft class. He kind of ish this year's version of Logan Cooley. He's not as good of a skater at all. Like Logan Cooley is a tremendous skater and so dynamic off the rush. Will Smith has the same level of handling skill and creativity and dynamic ability. The skating is solid, but it's not amazing. I currently have him ranked 10th overall, but you could convince me to pick him as early as like 7th or 8th if my top 6 are off the board. He's very good, and he's going to go top 15 in this draft. I'd be absolutely shocked if he fell beyond that. He's the best player on the US NTDP this year. Though I'm also a very big fan of Ryan Leonard, and really like Oliver Moore as well. But yeah, Will Smith is a lot of fun, and he's just really like very, very high end playmaker, which is, it's always nice when you can bet on a high skill player who also has a defining ability, right? Like whether it be like a great shot paired with getting open in the offensive zone, or just this ability to not only feed pucks to the slot, but to create the lanes to open it up, to create space for teammates, and all these different aspects that go into playmaking beyond just pure passing ability. And Will Smith has that all, and the handling skill is exceptional. He's a lot of fun to watch for sure.
And that was a lot of really, really useful information. And I'm so excited for our listeners to hear these episodes, because this is something that, I feel like last year we got really, really into the draft stuff early because the Canadiens were bad. And we kind of forgot this year that they're still in like year, now it's the first year of a rebuild. So, there's still a whole bunch of draft stuff to get excited about, a whole bunch of prospects to look into. So I think our listeners will get a lot out of this episode. So Sebastian, tell people where they can find your work before we sign off, please.
Yeah, for sure. So everything I do is just centralized on Twitter. So _Sebastian at Twitter. And yeah, like everything I do is there. I'm the director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects. So check out Dobber Prospects. We released our midterm rankings a few weeks ago. So go check that out. I believe it was like a 3,000 word write up that ended up happening there for our top 50 players, I believe. And and our next ranking is until April, so we have some time to change our minds on some players. But quite a bit's going on. But yeah, just on Twitter is where you can find all of my work.
And I want to thank you so much for your time today. I know we took up a lot of it, but we've been waiting to have you on for like a couple months now. So we were like, let's milk this and let's get as much as we can. So I'm really, really excited. And hopefully you'll come back at some point before the draft. Once we know where the Canadiens will actually be picking, it'll be a lot easier to kind of, have these projections and stuff. But I'm so excited for people to listen to this. And if you want to find us on Twitter, we are LO_Canadiens. I'm at The Active Stick. Scott is at Scott Matla. You can always email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. We are also on YouTube, so you can leave questions in the YouTube comments as well. And obviously, subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow with the mailbag.